Hello, everybody. Welcome to Learn with Lowell show. Today, we're joined with Slater Victoroff. He is the founder and CTO of Indico, an enterprise AI solution for unstructured content that emphasizes document understanding. You can think about this topic today as centering around writing, business, leadership, tech, recruiting, learning, and AI, as well as MMA and a bunch of other topics, which is actually a lot of fun. Just to give you a quick rundown of what, some of the topics we get into, we discuss Dune, the fiction novel. We discuss Richard Feynman facts, how he listens to customers, set features, and builds the right stuff, which actually it's really hard to do in tech. Writing and world building and how he translates to business. That's actually really interesting to see how useful just being a creative writer is to thinking about and structuring your business life. How he built Grit in himself and how he uses MMA with customers and how it just in general it influences his life. He doesn't attack anyone. That's a joke. We get into that in the episode. So thank you for joining us today with the Learn with Lowell show, and let's stay curious and learn about Victor. Which Dune version do you like the most? Do you appreciate the recent Dune movie, or is it the early 2000s? Or I think there's even an older one, but like the two most recent ones, the miniseries and the one that just came out, I think are really, really top notch. So I'm curious which one is like your go-to if you're watching Dune.
Yeah, so I will say I haven't actually seen the miniseries.
It's really good.
Yeah. I will say there's a special place in my heart, I think, for one of the other ones you're talking about, even though it never actually got made, but Jodorowsky's Dune.
Oh, I heard about it. Yeah, it's a big deal.
Yeah, just because like Jodorowsky is this like really wacky and like, by the way, like not very good guy. He's like one of those directors that's like, oh, the art is so important and does a lot of like really, really weird stuff to maintain that. But I just thought it was such an interesting idea to have like such an avant-garde kind of recreation of Dune. I think the movie is great just because I think it does a good, faithful rendition ish, like I think it's always a very hard thing to figure out how to translate a book into a movie, and especially something like Dune where you've got this omniscient narrator, and so much of what makes it cool is kind of knowing what everyone is thinking in a scene. But I think they did a good job, making it kind of interesting in its own right.
Yeah, I like how in the recent one, and I would recommend the miniseries. It's really good.
I'll have to check that out.
I think it seems to me that the recent movie is going to be made in a similar way to the miniseries, because it is literally part one, and I don't think it's gonna be two parts. Like I think it's gonna be like at least 3 parts. So we're gonna have like a little Lord of the Rings thing happen without it being deliberately. Like Lord of the Rings, they made it all in one go. This one's like, is it good enough? All right, we're gonna keep going. All right, is it good enough? We're gonna keep going. But but the production value is just so great.
I hope they honestly go even wider than that, because like I just can't help but think about like Dune, the first book, and how little of the broad Dune universe that gives you. Like I feel like you get to the end of the first Dune book and you're like, that was cool, but I understand so little, right?
Yeah.
And so I hope they're playing around with some kind of like new MCU or something like that, because I feel like there's a lot of appetite. I think they've like proven it out, making these really epic high production value, like 10, 12 things where they put out a new movie every year. I'd love to see more of that.
That'd be awesome. Well, some of the things that were really interesting in the newest one is how like they really allowed the prophecies to show like they weren't real. Like they were real, but they weren't real. So it wasn't like they were giving you the answers, and so you had to kind of like play. So it was like a fun thing where sometimes when you have prophecy in fiction, where it's like, all right, well, tomorrow I'm getting struck by lightning and there's nothing you can do about it, and that's boring. Where with Dune, it's like you have this prophecy, something's gonna happen, and then you end up having to like murder that person, and he shows you through murdering him what it's actually like to be Fremen and of the desert. Like, but his death was him teaching you. It wasn't his actual friendship. So it was just like such an interesting concept.
Yeah, I mean, I always also just thought that the portrayal of the Bene Gesserit was so it was just like such a gripping kind of twist on a secret society to like bring out the first time around, right? And to have that kind of interesting twinning between that kind of spiritual prophetic side, right, with also kind of this very like calculating political machinations, which is like usually not things that you see together. But I think it's just like, I don't know, it's a really, really cool bit of world building, I feel like.
Yeah. I don't think in the book series they ever touched on this, but the idea that they dump Paul and then the mom on the planet, and they don't think like the spice, which literally supercharges people, is not going to have an effect. They're like, oh, just go there, hope you survive. But it's like they're like snorting nos and like breathing it in all the time. And that's when Paul started having his like visions and stuff. Like he just started snorting nos essentially.
Yeah, I mean, like I have to say, like for all of the things that I love about Dune, one of the very fair characterizations is like Frank Herbert was actually not like a very consistent world builder. I think that it's very clear that a lot of these ideas were just like, this would be super cool, right? It's like, why does space cocaine power spacecraft, right? Like, because it's cool, right? I don't think there's anything wrong with that, right? I really like the bits of like pseudoscience that he puts around it and like the consistency, and I think it makes it really like nice. But yeah, I mean, I think that is kind of like part of what you get in the Dune universe. Is like there are those little quirks of like, yeah, like there. It's like for these pseudo all-knowing beings, like I have no idea how they could have not seen that coming, right?
Yeah, and then you don't have a traditional hero story. Like Paul is not a traditional. I'm trying like for people who don't know, I don't want to be mean and like spoil this, but like it's been out for like 30 years. It is not. He's not Aragorn, right? He's not gonna go and he's gonna be king or whatever by the end. Like he literally is like, well, you know what happens. Like it is not what you think. It's like he's like, I don't like this prophecy stuff, and then he does something that is not what you think the hero would do. We probably should just spoiler tag this and say what we're talking about. I spoiler tag for anyone who doesn't want to know what this is. Yeah, he just like abandons and goes into the desert. Like that's such a weird thing. And doesn't he like blind himself too? Like you wouldn't.
Yeah, to like see more clearly or whatever.
Yeah, he has like this crusade, and then he just gives up. He's like, I'm gonna go live in the desert. This is my home now. And then his like son finds him, and then his grandkids are like dune worms. It's like such a weird concept.
Yeah, I mean, I think that one of the things that I didn't really appreciate about Dune, even reading through it the first time, is how weird it is to like tell a story from that omniscient point of view as well, right? Because that is one of the things. It's like it's very much, even though like Paul is the main character or whatever, it's very much not the story of like you said, like Paul going and becoming a hero, right? It's like it's the story of this planet, right? And like Paul is important, right? And like a really pivotal figure, but it feels like much more the story of the planet, and Paul is there, which to your point, right? It's like absolutely not a traditional hero narrative at all.
I think I don't know if you're in like nonfiction as well, but the Dune is kind of like Lawrence in Arabia, like the Lawrence of Arabia. Yeah. Basically the spice is oil. And like the Fremen are the Arabs that are having a revolt to kick the Ottomans out. It's like it's kind of close. I mean, no one turns into worms, but it's like you can see kind of. I feel like he took that base and he moved it from there. But I'm reading a book on the subject. I think it's Lawrence of Arabia or something like that. It's a great book. I highly recommend it. Yeah.
Yeah. No, I mean, I read a lot, but I haven't read that in particular.
Yeah. Are there other go-to sci-fi series or books that you typically recommend to people? Like if you make a new friend, you're like, sure, you gotta check this out so we can talk about these. Do you have anything like that?
Yeah, so I think it depends, how I think there's sort of this spectrum from science fiction to fantasy, right? And it depends a little bit, where they dial in there. I think that my favorite just like go to, as hard as I like to get on the sci-fi side is really Arthur C. Clarke. And one actually I think worth mentioning specifically, because I think they're coming out with a series or a movie around it, is Rendezvous with Rama. And that was one of my first pieces of, I think, like really hard sci-fi. And just to like, kind of highlight the story, not to give anything away, but it's sort of like an alien spacecraft shows up, and it's the story of these scientists like figuring out what on earth this thing is. And I think one of the things that he does so well, because Arthur C. Clarke was, a kind of respected scientist in his own right, is this very, very human story in a really bizarre situation. Right. It's like, how do really ordinary scientists react when you put them in the middle of this, like highly imaginative, bizarre alien craft? And he's just a really, really good writer. I know 2001: A Space Odyssey is like obviously his most famous work, but I think that, the quality of all of his stuff is really, really high.
I'm a big fan of his writing on science. Like he's able to describe chemistry and other concepts in such a way where it's kind of fun, even if it's dry. Even this is coming from someone who reads textbooks all the time, but like but he makes it a little bit more fun.
Well,
and
I
it's much
think
more
there's like
digestible.
such an amazing value in making science digestible, right? I mean, I think Feynman is probably the most common example of that, you know, and it's so interesting, I think, hearing Feynman talk about it himself, because, you know, I went and read, you know, Surely You're Joking, Mr. Feynman, and, you know, just understood the sheer wealth of research he contributed to, right? Just amazingly prolific. Then, you know, he wins the Nobel Prize for this particular kind of diagram, and he's very almost self-effacing, right? He's like, oh, you know, like I won the Nobel Prize for drawing pretty pictures, right? But you know, I think it's so much the inverse of that, right? Is he came up with this very simple analogy for extremely complex behaviors and reactions, right? And I think that it's interesting on two ways, right? That is the thing that they point to as the greatest contribution he ever made. And then at the same time, how he almost doesn't give himself credit for it, because, you know, it's not real science, it's just explaining science. So I think it is both incredibly useful and not paid enough attention to by most folks.
Yeah, and he had a weird life. He started out, he was working on the Manhattan Project. He was just constantly, this is a funny anecdote. I don't know if you had like your favorite Feynman fact, but mine is that he'd get so irritated by there being like so many compartmentalizations of during the building the bomb, that he would just go into these people's offices and just break into them and take the files. And then he'd have like his own special file box with all the information. And he was just constantly getting in trouble for it.
I love it. I think one of my favorite like Feynmanisms ever is like, if you don't know what's going on, ask a question. Or he like goes through and like someone's walking him through, I want to say like some early nuclear reactor, and he knows absolutely nothing about reactor design. You know, he's like this physics guy, right? So, you know, he's like, I don't even know why they called me in here, but they think I'm an expert for some reason. So they're like blueprints, and he points his hand. He's just like, all right, randomly he points at some valve, and he's like, what happens if that fails? And the guy goes and like reads through it. It's like, oh well, wait a minute. And, you know, by kind of the sheer random happenstance, you know, he found something that didn't actually have an appropriate failsafe. But I think it's I don't know. I get very frustrated with how siloed things are today. So, you know, I think I resonate with that frustration very much.
Yeah, especially since we at our fingertips, we have the whole internet. We have the ability to connect with anyone. I was emailing someone from that's in Asia right now. And so it's like, you know, we can be having a Zoom call. You're in Boston, I'm in the Midwest, like access to all this technology yet. I mean, this is not like a new thought, but like people feel pretty like, I don't know the word, siloed, I guess. Yeah.
Yeah. Well, it's like communication speed helps, but if we're speaking different languages, then saying it faster doesn't solve all the problem, right?
Mm-hmm.
It's weird, like especially nowadays, because that is my role in a lot of ways. I have to kind of sit between the technical side and the business side and kind of the customers and sort of play, you know, air traffic controller almost, right? So often what I do is, you know, either, hey, I realize you two are using the same words, but you actually mean two completely different things, or even the reverse of that, of like, hey, actually you two are describing differently, but you mean the same thing. And it's really surprising how hard it is for people to see just kind of how siloed you know, two different units are.
That's fair. So like when you interact with customers or people in your in-house, when you're trying to like build like a feature set or something, and like a customer will say, I want this, but then you have to kind of like listen to hear what they actually mean by what they
and
then like translate it to your team in such a way where they understand what that you could say like, they want this widget. And your team can say, we want this, we're gonna build this widget. But then like, even like what that comes out of that pipeline doesn't mean you're gonna get that widget. They might, it'll be like it's like a game of telephone. This happens a lot for people who don't work in tech or just anything. How like, if you don't have safeguards or like ways of making sure like people understand the vision, that happens a lot. But I'm curious, what are some of the processes you put in place to ensure that it's more of a direct feed, you know, 1-to-1 ratio of information being translated back and forth?
You know, a lot of what it comes down to is actually, you know, I think the game of telephone is exactly right. You know, I think that we can't hope that we're going to perfectly sort of translate from one side to the other. So we've tried to focus much more on what does that contract look like? You know, what should we be coming away from, you know, at this particular stage? And I think one of the things, for instance, that's most critical for us is, you know, when you're out there and you're talking to customers and someone is asking for a particular feature, you've made two problems there, right? Because when you're talking to customers, very rarely should they be like, this is the specific feature, I want. You should be trying to direct them much more. Here are the problems that I have. Here's what I wish I could do, which is actually really importantly different from, this is the specific feature that I want. And then also, it's about when you pass something along internally, again, you should never really have your executive team say like, this is the feature that we want to build. I mean, maybe when you're 5 people, like that's appropriate, right? But even at like 10, 20 people, right? That's not really appropriate. We're like 80 folks now. So it's like very, very much not appropriate, right? So instead, it's much more about the executive team saying, okay, here's where the competitors are at, right? Here's what we should be comparing ourselves against to. Here's the success metrics, right? And here's how we're going to measure this. And here's, the feedback that we've been getting. And that really becomes much more the bundle, right? So the goal is based on what we're hearing from customers. What would we be hearing from customers instead, in this success criteria, right? And having that framing instead of, again, trying to kind of like whack-a-mole on features is, much more productive, I think.
Yeah. This kind of goes into your writing world building aspects of your mind, because I think there's especially if you're a fan of Brandon Sanderson, I think I've heard him say this where if someone says what is wrong, listen to them. But if they say how to fix it, don't listen to them, because they'll give you a sense of like, hey, there's something going on here, but like usually they're not the people to figure it out.
Yeah, actually, I think he gives this exact feedback for writing critique, and it's amazingly helpful, right? Because, and that's something I do. I write fiction. I've got a writing group, and so we give each other critique. And one of the things that's really hard is figuring out, how do you critique someone else's writing? Especially something like fiction, it's very, very personal. And how do you kind of separate your personal opinions from kind of whatever? And that's really the key, right? Is your experience can never be wrong, right? You might not know how to fix it. You might not know, what they should change, right? You might not even know if the experience you're having is intentional or not, right? Someone might be like, wow, I felt like really disoriented reading this page. And maybe that's good, maybe that's bad, right? You could take the next step about like, oh, I was disoriented. You should add like XYZ details, right? But maybe I'll just like, actually, you should be disoriented on that page. That's exactly how I want you to feel, right? And I think that's the real difference, right? Is like you set kind of the goal and the experience and find that delta, right? As opposed to being really prescriptive about what a solution looks like.
Actually, this is a great way to segue into a question I definitely wanted to ask you. When we talk about experiences and how they shape things, I am curious how your experience with MMA affects your world and business, particularly, and to what extent it does, if at all. Do you think like your background in MMA affects like how you go about doing business?
Yeah, I mean, I think that so I will say that I am very strong-willed generically. And so actually, let me maybe preface this. There's probably an answer that I would give, and probably an answer that some of my coworkers would give.
Yeah.
I think the most important thing from my perspective is really the aspect of grit, right? I think something that I often say is like, people in tech really hate getting hit in the face, which is understandable, right? But as like an MMA guy, I am very used to getting hit in the face and be like, oh yeah, like good one, let's keep on going. And sort of that sense of very healthy competition, if you will, right? So I think that's one place where it's like very, very healthy, is it gives you a sense of like what really matters, like what doesn't, like really helps you roll with the punches and build up that grit. So I think that's really, really helpful. That's probably the answer I would give. I think probably, in fairness, my coworkers would emphasize the fact that, sometimes I will get in fights with customers, right? Not like brutal ones, obviously. I'm like very, very tactful, but, I have a really clear sense of sort of the correct way that people should go about AI projects, right? And there's a lot of hype and whatnot, and I can get somewhat combative, right? Personally, I actually see that as like very, very different from my MMA experience. And believe it or not, like when I'm doing MMA, I'm like the happiest guy in the world. The judge always has to like, tell me to stop because when the guy like gets a hit on me, I want to tell him good job, but you're not supposed to talk during a spar. But yeah, so I don't know. There's probably two sides to that.
Yeah. So you have customers come in and you just start wrestling them in the middle of the board.
Yeah, just start wrestling them. It's like, look, I know you think that really you should be using logistic regression here, but to explain why you shouldn't, we got to get in the cage. Sorry,
Yeah.
look, I don't make the rules.
Put you in a headlock first, so you're really
look,
paying attention.
Yeah, there's an octagon down the street. Actually, we got it reserved. We thought it might come to this. So look, everyone else continue on with the meeting. We'll be back in 20.
I mean, if they do it and then they don't immediately abandon you afterwards, like, you know that they want to be your customer.
That's true. No, that is a fact. You know, that's a serious takeaway. It's like, look, if you want to buy Indico, you're gonna have to fight me. Sorry.
Yeah, you need to at least get me to a draw, and that's how I know you're worthy. You know, you gotta like pull the sword from the stone, but like you have to like get in the octagon for like 10 minutes, like Spider-Man or something.
Yeah, it's tough because like sometimes people use that as a joke. So like I have to be very careful in my reactions. Like someone, I think in the early days of Indico, we were at the office. It's like, oh, you know, like we disagreed on like the pointing for a ticket or something. And we're like, oh, we got to fight in the octagon. I'm like, I mean, we could if you want. And everyone's just like horrified.
Yeah. I to your point, I think a lot of people aren't really used to like disagreeing, I guess.
Yeah.
Like I think people, they want to, I don't know what it is, but it's like the confrontation of saying, hey, you might be wrong here. I've been in a number of places where there's just people having like a healthy disagreement. It's like, oh, this is great, and I'll just like walk off and let them have their thing. And I'll come back and be like, whoa, they were fighting, and whoa, it's like they like it's like it's good. Like these two people were sharing their experiences, like they're being extremely respectful. There's a lot of passion. Like don't like, you know, thank you for letting me know you were concerned, but like, you know, jump in and maybe like offer your input next time.
Yeah, I feel like that's what success looks like, right? Yeah. It's like you've got to, it's like people do naturally disagree. And kind of like I was saying earlier, a lot of my job nowadays is even just like two people might even be saying exactly the same words for that reason, because people naturally want to agree with each other. And like, that is good. Like coming to consensus is a really important part of the process, but it's even more important because I think people do have that strong predilection to point out, it's like, hey, you know, even though y'all both said that you want a feature that looks like, you know, whatever X, what about this particular aspect Y, right? Actually, I think y'all, you know, you two folks are thinking about this in a slightly different way. And then that's actually what gets the interesting conversation started, right? Because it is those points of tension and disagreement where you've got to make decisions. That's actually where the interesting stuff happens, right? Like you're not going to make progress without difficult conversations and difficult decisions.
I actually think that a team really doesn't become a team until they can disagree with each other. Like until they sit there and just really are like, I think we're going in the wrong, like this is the vision, I think this is the right set for it, and they just talk about it. And like they can get passionate as long as they're respectful, like, you know, don't be mean.
Yeah.
But like I've built several teams, like grown several teams, and there's a moment where like everyone's just new, you know, because they're growing fast, and they're like, I'm respectful and I'm listening to your ideas and I'm letting it go. And then there's a moment where like everyone's like, I have opinions and I'm sharing them, and it's like, yes, it has happened. We're a team now, and we're even like everyone's like working and producing, right? But like that moment is like the before and after, just in terms of production, how people feel the culture, like is entirely night and day. And I totally have a team of like 80, so I don't know like how that scales with I think the biggest team I've had is like 25. But
yeah, I mean, it's very much the same thing that we're trying to do. I would say there's probably a couple more steps to it now. And this is another one where like, I didn't think about it consciously until like some people started telling me that this was how they thought about it. But actually, I think it works really well, right? Because now when we're, you know, at like 80 folks, right? It used to be, you know, when we're 10 or 20 folks, right? You know, I'm working with every person as soon as they enter the company, right? Like I interviewed them, I know them, they know me, and we can start getting into like a really productive kind of like debate and rapport from day one, right?
Yeah,
I can't really do that when you're 70 or 80 folks, right? Like for someone that hasn't met me before, like having the CTO show up and be like, oh, you did XYZ wrong, like really bad. Like no one likes that experience. So now, but thankfully, right, like everyone at the company has this really like productive growth mentality, right? So it also means like I don't have to be their first stop there, right? So it's much more like, you know, at the start, I'm like, you know, kind of arm's length, you know, I'm probably not going to be interacting with, you know, most new hires like in their first like couple of weeks outside of like maybe a one-on-one here or there. But, you know, they'll have some really productive, you know, conversation with their manager probably, and I'll probably be in contact with that manager about sort of like where we want to go. But it's going to be a lot like, you know, softer, you know, like more palatable coming from them. And they sort of get used to that idea of, you know, productive conversation and, you know, how we're really going to help them grow. And it's like, look, And again, I think just really importantly, like it's not personal. Like we're not going to fire you because you made a mistake, right? Like we're not idiots. But some companies are out there, so sometimes it does take folks some time and some coaching to get over that. But then there's kind of progression to that where like at some point, I will see their work, right, and I will start commenting on it, and I can be pretty aggressive is probably not right the word, but I'm pretty direct with my feedback. Where I'm just like it'll usually be like, page 3 is like awesome. This is like the best thing that I've ever seen. Like pages 4 through 6 are terrible, and you need to start over, right?
Yeah.
So it'll be both of that on both sides. But by that point, they like feel pretty good about it, and then I'll probably start working with them, coaching, getting in like a productive dialogue there. And then there's also like a really important checkpoint, at the back end of that, which is the first time they kind of submit something, and I'm just like, no notes, send it along, right? And I wasn't even paying attention to that, but apparently that's a really important moment for employees too, because that's when they feel comfortable then becoming that person's like, okay, now I've met the quality bar, right? Now I can help other people get here. Mm-hmm. And now there's like a bunch of other folks that can kind of bring people through that same kind of arc, but that's kind of how it's scaled with size.
That makes sense. Are there things that you do to signal to people that you're like when they're coming in, that you have a different organization or their processes to get the best out of people? Because something I've found is that like in the interview process, I have a couple of things I do that just like are basically, you don't need to give me the stupid answers. Like tell me who you are so I can know who you are, and I'll tell you who I am so we can see if we'll work together. But like,
absolutely.
And then when you work at places, it's like, is this really going to be what it's going to be like? Because there's so many places, especially in startups, where like everyone knows what to say, right? But like many places do not believe in what they're saying.
Yeah.
So I'm curious, like, what do you do to kind of not just signal, but to show people, not show, don't tell, like new hires so they can really get up and do their best.
Well, like to your point, it starts before the hire, right? Yeah. Like, you really have to start this in the interview process, right? And so, in our interview process, I think part of it is we've got honestly a really, really good set of core values that we do really own and embody. And, a portion of that is that not only does everyone have a core values interview where we go through, here are the 6 core values, but your performance review, is actually done against those 6 core values as well. So that's one piece that is definitely really important that shows like, yes, like we care about communication and education and, this sort of mentality. But another piece that's really important, the way that I often say it, and actually this is in sort of like learning about productive disagreement, the way that I often say it is, at the core of Indico, we are doing something new, right? That means that by definition, nobody knows the right way to do it. That means every person that joins is going to have to develop some opinion about the right way of doing something. It's sort of like piloting this massive, massive ship, right? We don't know where the iceberg is going to show up, right? It's incredibly complex. We don't know where the next problem is going to be. So we need to make sure that every single employee at Indico feels confident to like raise their hand and be like, oh, there's an issue here. Or the way that I often say it, and this is kind of, the concrete benchmark that we hold ourselves to, is that me as the CTO, right? I have to be, if I'm up and giving a presentation to the whole company, right? Anyone at the company should feel comfortable raising their hand just in the middle, like interrupting me in the middle of a presentation and being like, no, actually, that's wrong. You're full of shit, right? And critically, that is leadership's job to maintain, right? That kind of environment. So just as much, and so we tell them that we really, really mean that in the interview stage, right? But then in terms of modeling that, I think that, if your executive team isn't actually modeling that for you, then it doesn't really matter, right? So we actually make a really big point as sort of, the leadership team of, having productive disagreements publicly, right? Of recording a lot of these Zoom sessions where it's like, wow, here's us just like beating each other up on product for an hour, right? And sharing all of that stuff, right? Because I think that, if people can't see you like really, really kind of productively disagreeing with each other, if you can't model like a respectful, productive way of doing that, they're not going to know how to follow suit.
There's some like really good techniques in there that I enjoy, and I also completely agree that it starts with the hiring phase, which is funny because like people have talked to me about like, how do I have a great team, or like how do I like get the best out of someone when they're on the team? So it starts with, did you hire the right people? And it doesn't mean like the person's a bad fit, like a bad person or not good enough. It's just like, are they with like what you're going to try to do? Like, I think there's a lot of people that have the mentality. Fit. Yeah. A lot of people have the mentality where it's like, I'm grabbing a body. Oh, you can do JavaScript. Well, you can go do this. And it's like, that person can do their best work at maybe a very small section of things in the world, just like I can, just like you can. So like just putting them, like throwing money at them and saying, go do this thing, means that you're potentially denying them the thing that would actually make them great, very happy in the world. But if you find the people that actually would be great on the team, then like when they come in, like everything else kind of flows better. But so it's really interesting to hear you echo that point as well, that I think a lot of people miss, which is the hiring process is a key spot, and not just finding the right people, but setting the tone for the relationship when they come in. Because a lot of places that I've found is that they'll have like one standard for hiring, and when they come in, it's almost, you can almost like see the whiplash on people when they're like, oh, this is what it is, or oh, this is what we're built. I've known people who join a place and they are literally like, so what are we building? Just to double check, because like everywhere just screws with them so much. It's like
it is true.
You just
it's absolutely heartbreaking, right? Like
yeah.
I think everyone loses, honestly, when you do that, right?
Yeah.
You know, my opinion is like in that like culture conversation, right? You know, you should be disqualifying as many people as you're qualifying, right? And that's a mutual disqualification, really importantly, right? You want to make sure you're putting the candidate in a spot to disagree, right? And if the things that you're saying about your culture and your company aren't objectionable, if they're not arguable, if you can't say like with a straight face at the end, like some people like this, some people don't, but we're looking for people that do, right? You know, then you haven't really, you know, then you're just kind of doing apple pie kind of stuff, right? Stuff that just like sounds good, but it's probably not realistic.
Yeah. Are there, how do you force yourself to continue learning and trying? I imagine the team's a big component of this, but do you have like any mechanisms where like people that you know that are like as good as you or better, but like CTOs and other companies will like come in and like audit you for like kind of like how teachers do, you know, like they'll sit in the back and just watch how you do your job for like a day. You're like, here's so many things that you could be doing better, because they're the person who's removed enough to give the outside perspective to help people see how they're speaking. I'm just curious if like if you have any processes
It's an
like that.
interesting idea. Yeah, no, I mean, like it is. I think that the further you get and like the deeper into like a technical niche you get, like the harder it is to find mentors, unfortunately. So like I think that I guess maybe also like, to be fair, like when you're younger, like starting out, or like when I was, like there was just so much that I had to learn. It was like everyone had something to give me almost, right? So I think that it has gotten a lot harder for me, right? I think that I have started to invert things a little bit, right? I mean, like on the one hand, I'm just like desperate for peers, right? And yeah, like there's a couple of friends that I've got where just like, you know, just like every conversation with them is awesome, and we just like email together from time to time, and that is helpful. But you know, I actually really appreciate you bringing it up, just this notion of like staying sharp, right? And keeping on top of stuff, because I think it, like I'm terrified about it, honestly, every day, right? This idea that I'm going to get slow, and the stuff that I'm learning now is, and the way that I'm executing on it is just very, very different from what things looked like in the early days, right? You know, it used to be this very direct, like, you know, I'm going through this tutorial, like I'm checking off these tickets, right? I'm building this feature in X amount of time, right? And it's different now, right? I mean, it's not better or worse. It's just very, very different. I don't know. So I do a lot of advising of companies, and I try to spend time with companies that are in the situation that we were in, and just try to stay, you know, as up to date as possible on new stuff that's happening that way, right? And you know, I don't have time to advise that many companies, but you know, I find like if you're very, very opinionated about like, I want to work with companies that can benefit very directly from something that I have really specific experience in, that for me has been a really good way of kind of like staying sharp, staying like marginal, because these are like really smart people that are going to keep you honest, right? But then also helps you like kind of pay it forward a bit, right? But it's tough. I really don't have a magic bullet there. I'm like constantly trying. I'm constantly trying more stuff.
But I do some advising for other startups in many different domains, and it's almost like thesis testing sometimes. Like I'll have like they'll talk to me. It's like, well, here's some idea. Like here's my thought process about this idea, and here's the things I would suggest to you. And these are the ones that I'm very confident work, and these are the ones I'm like, I think that like if I was doing them, it would work, but just because I'm a crazy person. And it's like kind of like they go out and then they did the testing, and it comes back like, no, the one that you thought was weirdest is actually the one that did work. So, oh, great, you know. So it's like you're validating, you know, your own ideas, which is interesting of itself. I think this is a concept that I've been thinking about a lot myself, as you can tell, because I've been learning coding the last 2 years to build the MVP for the thing I'm building. and it's like I'm constantly reminded how dumb I am. So
Right.
like, so I literally have friends that will like every now and again just like look, like I'll just explain what I'm doing and they'll look at it and like, don't do that. Be doing this. So like I can imagine like maybe if you had like like literally do like a TA like a review thing where like you know maybe like you pay them to like have a trip with their wife or their significant other and they just kind of like follow you around for a day and then they give you like a metric based, you know, here's what you're doing, here's some advice, here's some stuff that I see you doing that I make the same mistakes. And they could literally be a peer or even someone junior, but like just someone designated to review you in that way, if it's not just your team doing it naturally, I think that'd be really interesting.
I totally agree. I mean, I do think it would probably be most helpful to have like a peer or someone like a little bit more senior that it is at least, or like senior is a really tough notion, right? But I'd really like it to be someone who's like been at the same stage, right? In some way, shape, or form. But yeah, I don't know. I do really feel like there is a dearth of it. It's like very, very hard to get like crisp feedback, right? And like the question I also would just like, because you know, a lot of the stuff that I do now is like content production, right? Is like roadmap, you know, rejiggering, and you know, it's like what's the right engagement for someone? It's like what's the right amount for someone to like learn to give me helpful feedback there. And it's like what I've ended up doing is just kind of like going really, really specific of like, oh, you know, like I know someone who's like sharp organizationally or like someone who's sharp on like the ML side, but like, I don't know. And maybe part of this is also just like the CTO role is like really weird, I think. I guess every C-level role is kind of weird, but it's just like people define it really, really differently in different organizations, you know? And I think there's like some CTOs I've seen that are like almost MBAs and are like 100% organizational, right? And I'm very much not that kind of CTO, right?
Yeah, they should be like COO or something.
Yeah, I mean, like I think that there's a lot of blurring that happens, right? But yeah, I think that there's just like ambiguity, like, and yeah, but I don't know. I think that it would be a really interesting kind of model if you can find, if you find someone who is willing to do that and wants to shadow me in like AI for a day, has like been through it, you know, let me know.
Okay, I know a bunch of people, so I'll poke some people.
All right, dope.
Yeah, it depends on how you perceive colleague or above, but and then at the same time it's the areas that you want to improve upon. Maybe it's not technical leadership that you want to work on, but just leadership in general, like how do you like manage and get the best people out of people or something like that. I don't know. So like to your point of subdividing it down, that might be a like finding someone with the composite skills to just be a one-off. That might be that might be like two Narnia, but you can find like some people with specialized skills in those different areas that could help.
Yeah, I mean, I think to your like earlier point of like staying sharp, I think the place where I find myself like most aggressively in need for that kind of thing is honestly on the technical side, you know. And you know, I guess part of that is just because I'm a deep tech guy, but it's just like, but I mean, you know, you are too, so you know, I know you understand it, right? It's just like when you're really, really deep, you know, finding someone that you can productively bounce ideas off of is really hard, honestly. And it's tough, especially like deep in the technical side, right? If you don't have anyone to like bounce ideas off of, you know, that the line between brilliance and insanity can be really, really fine.
Yeah, that's usually where you find it. It's
exactly, that's the thing, right? It's like, but you need like someone to help, like, you know, bounce like when you through it and like sort the insanity from like the gem of brilliance, right?
Yeah,
I think it's really hard to do solo.
Yeah, are there like is there like it's probably like revolves around your tech stack, but there's a lot of really great communities out there on Discord around different frameworks. And there's usually like a couple people on there that are always crazy and give feedback. And it's like, how do you have a full-time job and do this? Like, you're such a great, you know, like, please let me know if you ever need help with stuff. But that's like such one way I find people. I literally just like go to like the oases that they all hang out and like find them there.
Yeah, I mean, I spent a lot of time on Stack Overflow back in the day. I'm a top level mod on Stack Overflow. But it's I think it's doable by framework. I think it's really hard for again like the deeper technical areas, right? Like it's really hard for me to like walk into an AI community. It was so like some of them are just like run by cranks, right? And like the folks that actually know what they're doing often it's like one of them and a bunch of other folks. I don't know. It's just tough, and a lot of them also just because they're like academics, like really hate anything public. Yeah.
One way that I found is that I keep up with journal publications, so I'm on like Sci-Hub,
Also,
And
this is actually an interesting thing about AI. Believe it or not, the journals in AI, well, there basically aren't any journals in AI. But
okay.
even if you look at the very top quality journals like Nature, right, they have retraction rates that are like 40, 50% for AI,
Yeah.
which is like, it's like makes you want to barf, right?
Mm.
So it's actually, it's highly conference driven, which is really interesting.
Okay.
It's almost all open publishing, partially because actually there's not, the universities in the US, like, unfortunately, are not very good at AI for a couple of reasons, just like on average. And you actually see in the US much more of the research is coming out of private industry labs, which is weird. It's got its pluses and minuses, but one of the pluses is that it means everyone is doing open publication, and so just everything is on archive, and like Elsevier is basically a non-issue, which is kind of cool. Mm-hmm. Yeah, but I don't know. It's a weird situation. Part of it is just like AI is like a really, really weird kind of a space.
Well, are there specific areas, someone might be listening right now that can help you out? Are there specific areas that you are trying to dig deeper on that you need help with?
Yeah, it's geometric deep learning, multi-modal fusion, and machine teaching.
I've never
all which are fields that debatably exist.
Yeah.
Yeah.
I've never heard of these things before.
So that's I mean, I'm happy to give you like the whirlwind. I think they're like awesome, frankly.
Yeah. What are they each of, like, what are
yeah. So machine teaching, as like a contrast to machine learning, is this really interesting notion that if you look at traditional machine learning objectives, right, people will constrain things pretty heavily, like, oh, it's a classification task or like a data extraction task or something like that. And the problem is that actually matches human experience very poorly. So one really good example of this might be something like you've got a Twitter, right? And you're trying to do binary sentiment classification, right? So that's a really classic ML task. Now, obviously, if I've got a tweet that says like, the battery is good, but the screen sucks, I can't really classify that as positive or negative, right? No matter how many people I have classify that, right? There's going to be some irreducible fuzziness to it. So machine teaching is really, really roughly this idea that what if instead of, just classification tasks and sort of these really, really constrained problem framings that we've had in the past, if there's a way we could change our objective functions to more closely match the way that humans teach one another. So it's, I think one example of where this was applied, it was a really interesting place where OpenAI actually applied it to the task of summarization. Now, summarization is tough, but one of the toughest things about summarization is understanding which summary is better than which other summary. And so, it's like a very crude, almost brute force approach, right? But it is still machine teaching. Is OpenAI is just like, all right, well, we're just going to generate two, put them in front of a person, and a human is really good at saying like, this summary is better than that summary, even if they can't say this is the perfect summary or this is the worst summary. So we'll just have them do that. And they had to change a lot of things, without getting too far into the details on the model on the back end to make it work with that target of like, this is better than that. But that's a really good example of machine teaching. And, then it led to a model that was like just insanely good and summarized things really, really well. So that's one I just think like really cool, like amazing area of research. Microsoft came up with the term machine teaching, maybe 18 months ago, or I don't know, maybe it's been a little longer than that. Multimodal fusion, also super, super interesting. So traditionally in AI, you've got, like NLP that deals with text. You've got computer vision that deals with image, right? You've got, structured data techniques and like, boosting for structured data, right? And never these techniques shall meet, right? They're just like totally separate fields of study, getting to that earlier siloing point. And the idea of multimodal fusion is really roughly, and we use it in documents, so I'll use that example quickly, but it's the idea of being able to reason across different data modalities. And one of the actually a good example I'll give on why this is so impactful, like think about drinking a glass of water, right? Extremely simple, right? I barely have to think about it. But think about all the systems that had to come together in my body to do that, right? I've got to like feel my arm, I've got to feel the weight, I've got to balance it, right? I have to like know what temperature it is just to make sure it's not too hot or whatever, right? Now, try to imagine doing that same problem, but as a purely visual task, right? So your arm is completely numb, you've got no sense of taste, you've got no sense of temperature, you've got no sense of, any of this. And you could still probably do it. Right. Like I'd probably, would visually check and, kind of start looking very robotic. Right. And you see how you take a problem that was incredibly simple and you've made it almost impossibly difficult by constraining your data modality, right? And so the idea is this is, the next stage for a lot of ML techniques, right? Is learning to combine these different modalities. One good example is OpenAI's DALL-E that goes between text and image. So it's like image captioning and vice versa. So you can like type something, it'll generate a coherent image. That's multimodal translation, which makes sense, translate from image to text. And multimodal fusion, documents are a really good example, where if you think about a table, there is the literal, stuff that might be in the table, but the visual layout is also really, really important. Or if you think about logos or visual styling and things like that, right? It actually turns out that you have to interpret across those two different data modalities for a lot of really important document tasks. And so that's one example of where you've got to fuse the two different modalities, right? Of text and image, right? To get to your final conclusion. Video is, another really good example. Computationally, we're not quite at the point where we can do video. But so that's multimodal fusion in a nutshell. And then geometric deep learning is just very roughly is deep learning plus very complicated math. Specifically, differential geometry there is sort of based on a couple of interesting notions, but one that I find really interesting is like, what is language and what are words? And one example of something that's really weird, you think about mouse, right? And there's a traditional field in ML called sort of a representation learning or transfer learning or something along those lines. And so the idea is, you'd have the word mouse and you learn some definition for mouse, right? And that'll be like a 200 dimensional on vector, or just a list of 200 numbers, and then you think immediately, okay, great. So now I've got some meaning for the word mouse, but I've got multiple different kinds of mouse, right? So I've got computer mouse and I've got animal mouse. What do I do, right? Like, what's the right analogy for that? And so the immediate one that people think about is like, well, I'll learn two different vectors, like I'll learn two different representations, right? And I'll just figure out which mouse I mean, and then I'll use the right definition at the right time. And it turns out that's actually not quite right, which is sort of weird. And you can think about these because these are two different vectors, like two different positions in space. So it's actually not the case, or it doesn't seem to be the case based on current research, right? That you have two different locations for the two different definitions of mouse. It's actually much more that you have one central locus, right? That is mouse in all of its incarnations. And the definition you're using is more about the direction that you pass through it. Right? So it's like maybe this direction is like computer mouse and this direction is animal mouse. And again, without going like too far down into the details, that kind of analogy and that kind of like really weird geometric kind of trying to twin sort of the analogies that we use in combining language and understanding how words relate to each other and trying to get sort of geometrical mathematical formalisms that you can twin with those. Sorry, take a deep breath, but those are kind of the three areas that I'm just like super jazzed about right now.
Is it possible to build like your own R&D team? I don't know how your team is structured.
That is, yeah, we did that. We have that.
Okay.
And they're great, and I love them, and I talk with them.
Okay. Well, yeah, I mean, that's probably nice too. I think in any company I have, at a certain point, as long as I have cash flow, I'll probably have like crazy people building stuff for fun. Well, like probably related to
what's the point of building a company otherwise?
Yeah,
like
you never know what's gonna come from it, which is kind of half the fun. It's like every day you open up a blank box, money could come from it.
I like we're a very, very kind of like R&D centric company, and I think that one of the things that's sort of like a realization that I came to a few years ago is like, if you're weird enough and interested in stuff like far enough outside the mainstream, literally the decision to make Indico in so many ways was like, we can't wait for the US PhD programs to like catch up to like where Europe and Canada are, right? So we've just got to like start doing the work, and the company was the best way for us to do it. Mm-hmm. It's kind of weird, right? But it kind of has stayed true, right? I mean, if you look at like GPT on the ML side, right, like that never would have happened. Like there would be no GPT series of models if it weren't for like Alec Radford, my co-founder, being like, actually, I'm going to drop out of school and just pursue ML on my own, because he wasn't going to wait.
What related to your team, is there like a pie wheel of percentages of like the different types of people on your team in terms of like responsibility? Are you like all engineers, and you do like sales, or I don't know, like
no, we've got like a good size sales team that's starting to kind of spin up, right? I think that the way that we we divide things maybe at like a slightly finer level. It's like I'm going to characterize more people as being a part of the product team, like the delivery team, than maybe other companies would. So, one thing that's also kind of interesting about us is, for us, R&D has kind of two equal arms. It's like the ML R&D and then UX R&D. Actually, to that kind of machine teaching point, we find that the juncture of those is actually like very, very meaningful. But yeah, so we're somewhere between 60 and 70% probably technical for some definition of that, but getting towards 50-50. But I think that even if you look at the folks that are technically part of our sales and marketing organization, right, or delivery organization, like they're very, very technical folks. Like I think that we try to make it really clear, like you don't have to be a PhD to understand ML, and actually, a lot of the important relevant details. I don't know, like we have like mini PhD sessions almost, even with folks that are going to be, like EBDRs, because I think it's really important for them to understand that kind of stuff. So, they might be characterized as like an ML analyst or something like that in another organization.
Do you have like in your organization like this, like brown bag lunches where like people can go and like learn from each other in either a structured or unstructured way, to kind of have like your own like in-house university similar to
yeah, we've got a couple of those. I think we are trying to figure out like how we want to take that up to the next level. We got which is awesome is we've got Friday demos between like engineering and sales and marketing, and often sales and marketing might bring a customer in to present about how they're using the product, and like all that's awesome. I really like that. It's a good place for sort of like centralized folks to talk. We also have an ML reading group that's kind of more generic stuff, and then we're now starting kind of an archive reading group that's sort of like a very specific like research paper review kind of session. But I think it's also a place where like, and I guess we also do have a very like open meeting policy. So we have a lot of meetings that might be customer meetings or something, and mark, hey, this is open to engineering. So, we like to have new engineers like see a couple of customer meetings during their onboarding, for instance. Yeah, but I think it's something that we are trying to figure out how to scale right now, right? Trying to figure out like, we don't want a huge number of them, but it's also, like 70 or 80 people, figuring out like what that balance is kind of tough.
That makes sense.
Yeah.
I guess last question on operationals. Is there an operation problem that you're running into right now, or like something that you recently solved that you wouldn't mind sharing? Because sometimes actually, like it's like people only share like the nice things, but like what is something that was a pain point and now that you've solved, and how did you do it?
Yeah, so actually, I think on the R&D side, this is really interesting one where we changed how we thought about R&D as a function. And the key problem that we were trying to solve, right? And I think a lot of organizations have this issue, is that if you think about R&D as like a portion of the development process, engineering doesn't get plugged in very early, and then the handoff is really messy, and then the time it takes to actually implement the thing and get it out into production is like very, very long, and it's bad, like, and everyone's unhappy with the whole process, right? So we tried to ask ourselves, okay, how do we sort of reimagine what R&D looks like? So this is part of what led to us redefining. It's like, okay, there's R&D at the top level, and then there's ML, and there's UX as two subdepartments of R&D. But actually, the key organizational change was a bit different from that. It was about tying product initiatives to SWAT teams. So the way that we said it instead is like, okay, everything should go through product. So that was number one, right? Is that like usually R&D is like off doing its own stuff, and they're not directly beholden to product. And we're like, all right, well, we've got a really great product team, right? And they understand enough about ML and the R&D stuff, right? That we can actually do this effectively, planning through them. So that was step number one. Everyone goes through the same product organization. Step number two is like, as we've got the success criteria around one of these initiatives that's more R&D-y, like we don't know exactly the way to do it, but also actually now a lot of our product initiatives are going to be more R&D, is we form a SWAT team. Right. And so the idea is like, when we define success criteria, before even we have the specific features or the mocks built up, we kind of bring together this group of folks that's like engineering and product and ML and UX, right? And, depending on the project, it might be a slightly different group of folks, but call it 5-ish people. that are then responsible for seeing through the problem definition and experimentation through to kind of the engineering point. And then the idea is like they are the quarterbacks through to production, even though they might, kind of bring the rest of the organization into different pieces. So switching to that kind of like SWAT team idea, bringing engineering and product in from the very beginning, twinning them to R&D is just, made a world of difference.
Mm-hmm. Sounds very similar to what Pixar does. There's a great book. I literally just I have like a stack of nonfiction behind me. I just finished reading. Stop it! I have Way of Kings. That's underneath this book.
Oh no way! Yeah, what a coincidence.
Yeah, but this book that kind of talks about like they use a similar structure. It's called brain trust, where like a movie can be considered like your SWAT team, where there's all these different people building it, but there's one person who's kind of leading the charge, and those people come up and they have meetings where they kind of like check each other and see how they're doing, and they give each other like, this is what might be going wrong, but not like, this is how you should fix it. And then they percolate down, and then they keep going with making their individual movies that, for Pixar at least turned out pretty good for them. So it seems like that
makes me feel good.
Yeah.
That's super interesting. I had never heard of that before. I kind of wish I knew. It was a hassle figuring that out.
Yeah, it's a good book. I'd recommend it.
Creativity Inc. You said it's called?
Yeah, Creativity Inc.
Yeah.
I think Creativity Inc. and then Work Rules by Lazo Bach would also be a book you'd enjoy. It's right across the room. That's why it looks weird.
Awesome. Yeah, no, that's perfect. I will definitely check that out. That's a good tip.
Yeah, I think it seems like in both those, you're already gravitating to the lessons in them. But the nice thing is that they have some of the trials and failures and some of the other things around it, which I think might kickstart you into thinking of other ways to do things as well. Like they were hugely interested in influencing to me, just to get my like, hey, these are things that actually have worked, and I can like experiment. Like, are these things that's going to work with us? And then now I can kind of like do even more, because you can kind of see what they've done since then. And so it's kind of fun. Like they're like a little tiny like research colony.
We're on like Gen 0 of this, right? Yeah. Like I'm sure there's stuff that we're screwing up, and it's like a lot better than what we were doing before. But like any lessons on like fine tuning it's like very useful.
Mm-hmm. Do you have like an amount of time you allow to elapse where things are happening before you do an analysis of the process, like what you just suggested, outlined? Like how much do you let it live in the wild before you see like what's working, what's not, and then affecting a patch essentially?
Yeah, like I wish I had a like formal number rule for this, but we are really conscious of it, because I will say that we almost always have been on the wrong side of that. Right. I think that it is tough. I have a really, really high sense of urgency. So, I think that especially in the early days, it's like we do something, oh, hey, we should change this process. I show up tomorrow, I'll be like, everything isn't fixed yet. Like what? Now obviously like you've got to actually give the process a shot. So I think right now we just try to be really clear about like, here is when we're making the decision by, right? And I think that because there's challenges on both sides, right? Because like you can't let it go forever. You can't be like, time really does matter. And so you kind of want to understand the shortest possible time where you have real good data. So we just try to kind of mutually agree, be like, this is a 30-day kind of thing, this is a 90-day kind of thing. But, some stuff like, the overall sales process for us, it's going to be 12 months before we actually get, the data like end to end. So we've got to like think really critically about like, okay, what are some underlying theses we've got that will kind of signal if we're on the right direction or not?
Yeah, that makes a lot of sense. So I have one last question, then I just have the rapid fire ones, because I know we're coming to the end. I want to be respectful of your time. So I believe you have some hot takes about venture capital. And so I would just, just want to hear your thoughts on it, on raising, on the field in general, and kind of get a sense of your thoughts on it.
Yeah, I think that it's like I don't know how hot my takes are. It's like it's hard to tell, but I think one of my strongest ones is I think that there is too much of a focus on raising as a success metric. Right. Oh, yeah. I think I get really, really frustrated, especially when I hear young entrepreneurs come and be like, oh, well, like this model is great because like this company did it and like they raised $20 million. It's like, you have no idea what's going on there. right? Like there's companies that like pop out of nowhere, like raise $300 million pre-revenue, right? And then die the next year, sell for 200 million, right? And like everyone's upset and like the investors don't even get their money back, right? And I think that's really, really important. I think one of, so I work with 406, I'm an EIR there. And one of the sayings that one of our partners there had that I love is startups die of indigestion, not starvation. And I think that, especially now that we've gotten a bit bigger and we actually do have a real amount of resources, the truth of that really has become very, very clear to me, right? Is the trick really is about focus, right? And not trying to do too much at once. I think that's the biggest issue. Yeah, I think that's probably one of the biggest issues. And like, frankly, if you're executing well, capital is not going to be the problem. Yeah. Right. Like execution is the problem and maybe capital will help. But capital is never the goal. And if you think about it as the goal, like you're not going to get it done.
Yeah. One thing that I think is interesting is when you have competitors, let's say have raised a lot of money. It's like, great, they get to waste $4 million doing some R&D for me.
Yeah. That's the thing, right? And now we've been for like a long time just like slugging it out against people that are like much better funded than us. And what I will say is just patience, like take a deep breath, stand back. Like we had competitors like show up and again, literally just like raise hundreds of millions of dollars, even before we had raised even 10. Right. And be like, oh my gosh, like what's happening? Like, have they figured something out that we haven't? And most of the time, no, it was just like some VC got really excited and, they all moved together. Right. And so they got a big round done, but then the thing blew up, like a year or two later. So just like keep your head down, like focus on what you're doing. I think that people focus too much in most cases with what their competitors are doing, especially if you're in deep tech. Like if you're doing something where like, you're not solving new technical problems, like research is not an issue, maybe it's different and you do need to be like really aggressive and do a land grab. But if you're doing something meaningful on the technical side, like figuring out how to package and sell that is, the limiting factor. And money actually isn't as helpful as you might think in figuring that out. It's actually counterproductive in some ways because it makes failure a lot more expensive.
Yeah. Do you think, I guess, like how you structure your time in terms of venture capital, is it more like finding the right partners versus finding money? It sounds like that's probably like where you like draw the line. Like you're not just out there like the most zeros. It's like who's behind the zeros that's probably most important.
100%. Right. I think that you really, I guess everyone's got a different philosophy, right? But the way that I view it is it's number one, like find the best partners possible. Like that's the most important thing, right? And then, it's almost like the size that you're raising should be an output, not an input, right? And you should really be dictating that and being like really, really firm. I think something that people don't understand is like, the most likely interaction you're going to have with your investors is your investors wanting you to raise more money than you feel comfortable. I'm sure there's some exceptions to that, but that was really weird and felt totally backwards to me when I went through it. But again, it's like, make your business plan, like commit to what you're going to try to do, right? And then make sure that everything is sensible and the numbers, work out, and then raise the amount of money that you need. I think that a lot of companies kind of flame out by just trying to raise as much money as they possibly can. And it's not a good idea. It doesn't work out.
Yeah. That's interesting. All right. So I'll not segue again because I know we're coming to the end. I was about to like ask you another. I was like, wait, no, we have like 3 minutes. Like, stop, Lowell. All right. So I'll ask this one because I know that's the story. It'll take like 5 minutes. All right. But what is a question that you have that is unanswered that if someone could answer, and this isn't like the deep tech questions we were talking about earlier, like anything else besides that, like maybe personal, unless you just like machine code all the way down. But what's the question you have that is unanswered that maybe someone listening can answer for you?
That is a tough one. I want to know how to get urban highways removed in Somerville. It's like it's a dumb, like very specific thing, but someone might actually know how to do that. There's like I don't know, it's like a very specific thing that would make my community better.
Yeah, I wonder if there's like analogous to like permaculture for urban planning.
That's a really interesting idea. Yeah, I'm very into permaculture. Like I am sick of only eating 5 vegetables or whatever.
Yeah, I like lazy growing food where you can just like if you're building something. Let's say you have a farm. If it's permaculture, like that's like maybe two. It's like the fun part of your week versus like the drudgery. If it's like a production farm, you have to put a lot of work into it. Like it's backbreaking.
Oh yeah, and it's completely different, right? It's like literally like economics on thin margins, like produce as much as you possibly can, like per acre, right? Because like you're making your dollars and cents on thin margins, right? Mm-hmm. Like totally different from permaculture, where it's like I'm selling this stuff at the farmer's market, right? And it's like people come here for the weird melons.
Yeah. Or the giant potatoes.
Or that. Yeah. I mean, yeah, I think, just like a random stat, like I heard that it used to be in hunter-gatherer times, like an average human would eat something like 70 to 80 varieties of fruits and vegetables and grains in an average week. And now we're down to like 7 or something like that. And I think that's the thing. I just think like there's a lot more variety out there than we realize. And there's some like delicious stuff.
Yeah. A similar factoid is peasants actually had more time on their hands than us.
I knew.
We work more for less. You don't even need to work that much.
Yeah, I mean, like maybe someday we'll go up to Northern California and just retreat to the communes.
Yeah. The Midwest would be cheaper though. It'd be like a third the cost.
Sorry, not San Francisco, Northern California. I mean actual Northern California.
Oh. I haven't been up there, so I'll take your word for it.
You should check it out. It's like the redwood forest up there, but it's like very rural. It's right on the Oregon border. It's a little tough to get to. There's like a 50% chance because it's so foggy that your flight into the one airport will get canceled or delayed. But it's worth the trip.
Yeah, maybe there's a train that could take us there, but
unfortunately not.
Okay. Yeah. Are there resources or books that you gift to people to help them understand machine learning? Or that you just generally give to people?
I think Cassie Kozyrkov does a really, really good job of talking about it. I also think Joy Buolamwini from the Algorithmic Justice League, I think their quality is like very, very high quality. I think there are probably some other folks like, but more research oriented, right? Like 90% of probably what I read is research papers and things of that kind.
Okay, well, then you have good days. You get nothing but learning then.
I love that, honestly. Like,
yeah, it's fun. Whenever I learn something new, my wife thinks that I'm having like I was like took cocaine because I start getting excited. Like I can use this in so many places.
Oh yeah, there's like a special kind of pleasure when you're 10 clicks deep in a Wikipedia hole.
Yeah. So last question is, what's a thing coming up that we all can kind of keep our ears looking for? Do you have to like an announcement? Is there like a newsletter? So like where can we go if there is something coming up? And what is that thing? Kind of like if you want to tease us.
So yeah. No, actually, so I've got 2. I've got one. We're gonna have the first ever unstructured event called Unstructured happen later this year at Indico. But also I'm gonna be putting out the Unstructured Data Landscape hopefully at the end of Q2. Again, first ever annual. It's gonna have probably 200-300 companies on it.
Sweet. And then to find them, we just go to your website, or do we have to do something special?
Yep. Yeah. No. It'll just be on the website.
And that was Slater Victoroff. Thank you everybody for joining the Lowell show today. So, as you saw, we really did get into writing business, tech, leadership, recruiting, AI, all these topics that I told you about, as well as books. Check the show notes, and you'll see everything that you need to see. Additionally, I have been thinking about adding a number that you can call at the beginning of the podcast, where it's like, if you're a subscriber and you have a question, you can just call it, text it. It'll go straight to voicemail because like I'm an introvert and I wouldn't want someone picking up. But you'd be able to call it and leave a, hey, I'm curious about this, or I'm having a problem with this. And I'll aggregate them and then make episodes for that type of stuff. I think that'd be pretty cool as a way to like get some more subscriber involvement, as well as we're rebuilding and expanding the YouTube channel. And so we're going to have the long form of these episodes as well as clips, which I think will be fun. If there's a better medium or a way you guys want to enjoy this type of content, let me know. A lot of really great stuff coming out. Really would love some feedback as we make these changes and move forward. Other than that, I really appreciate you taking the time and listening to me talk on. This is the end of the show. I hope all of you learned something new today, and I hope you stay curious and learn something as well. And if you do learn something new, feel free to message me about it or leave it in the comments.